It is National Probation, Parole, and Community Supervision Week. Criminal justice expert, PhD John Pataikes, joins us today to talk about why we ought to be happy about it. Thanks for joining us today, Doctor. We don't often think of, as we talk about taking a bite out of crime and getting tough on offenders, we don't think about how much money we actually save with these non-prison alternatives.
Yeah, it's a good point, Brian. I think most people are not aware of really the roles and the differences between probation and parole, but when you look at the correctional system, 7 million people are under correctional supervision in this country. 2 million are in jails and prisons. The rest are on probation and parole. 3 million are on probation, 2 million are on parole. And you're right, we do save money. The average cost is about $4,000 to $5,000 a year to keep somebody on probation or parole supervision versus $40,000.
Wow.
Now, of course, you got to take into account the seriousness of the offender, and certainly some people belong in prison, but the majority of the offenders are supervised in the community, which I think a lot of people may not be aware of.
And we're hearing that a lot of these lesser crimes are often drug-related. These are smaller burglaries or things that are done to support a drug addiction habit. With that in mind, might we put more money into those kinds of drug interdiction programs and that kind of thing?
Well, you're right. And actually, New Jersey and New York and a couple other states are taking the lead on that. And so if you possess drugs and you're addicted to drugs, rather than a prison sentence, they're going to mandate that you go for some type of drug rehab, okay? And now, if you don't take advantage of that, or if that doesn't help, then the next step would be prison. So that is a step a lot of states are taking to divert them from prison.
Let's go back to this old idea of the difference between probation and parole.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, again, most of the public is not aware of that. What you see on TV a lot of times is more law enforcement programs. What type of programs do you ever see on probation and parole? Very few. And I watch them all looking for that, and most of the time there's very little emphasis on that. Probation is a sentencing alternative for the less serious offender. Okay, usually no jail or prison is involved. So if you're a first offender, something not too serious, you'll be supervised by an officer of the court for anywhere from 1 to 5 years, all right? To be on parole, you have to have served time in prison. It's an earlier release from prison, okay? If you've met certain criteria, you'll be released under the supervision of a parole officer. The difference is that the parolee is a much more serious offender, okay? But their day-to-day activities are similar in that they monitor people in the community, And so again, I think a lot of times people get the two terms confused, and there is a difference in the type of offense that you've committed, whether you're on probation or parole.
I would imagine parole is often a good way to get an offender back into society, to make that transition.
Right. The fact that they have a parole officer, in addition to surveillance, their role is also to integrate them into the community. They know where the jobs are. There are employers that will hire, people who had a prior record. They know where they can get housing. So yes, part of their role is transition back to the community,
Let's talk about this idea of supervision. How effective is that really?
That's a good point. And I'll kind of quote with a lot of other researchers have said in the field that it's effective if you give them the resources. In other words, if I give you a caseload of 200 offenders, it's probably not going to be that effective. How can you monitor 200 offenders, okay? But if I give you a caseload of 40 or 50 offenders, you can do a better job.
Sure.
And then there are some departments that have what they call ISP, intense supervision probation. You get cases, you only get 15 cases, and you can do a much better job with that. So again, to answer your question, it can be effective if we give them a reasonable caseload and the resources, all right? If we don't, then it may not be that effective.
Are you finding that the majority of these systems among the states don't have enough resources?
Generally, they don't. When there were cutbacks, in a lot of budgets or whatever, instead of hiring people, they, were giving larger caseloads or whatever. But I think you're going to see a reversal because they're finding that now the emphasis is reducing the prison population, and the two biggest alternatives to that are probation and parole. So I think you're going to see an increase in the number of hirings in probation and parole over the next couple of years because, again, cost savings and the biggest alternative to corrections.
And you can't put everybody in prison.
Well, no, we're not building a lot of new prisons now, and not everybody belongs in prison, Probation has a good rehabilitation rate, in many cases over 50% of the people, as compared to parolees coming out of prison. Over 60-some% get rearrested within 3 years and end up back in a correctional institution.
So there's a good sign for probation then.
I think so. Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Doctor, thanks for joining us. Always insightful. We'll look to have you in again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.